Will Rogers, Chapter 4. Willie is a rabbit. "Goodbye," called Willie. "Goodbye," called Sally. "Hurry back right after school." Willie trotted away from the house where Sally now lived with her husband, Tom McSpadden. It was September, and Willie was on his way to school. Sally's house was so close to Drumgoole School that Willie was going to live there most of the winter. He rode along on his little sorrel mare and wished he could have spent the day just riding on the plains. He wanted to gallop up and down the river, looking for wild turkeys. Perhaps he might even stop and go fishing for a while. Or he might ride out and watch the cowboys at work. He might even help them. Willie was training Robin to be a real cow pony. He was teaching her to be a good roping horse. Then he wanted to teach her to round up cattle, to drive a herd, and to cut out a steer for branding. "Robin, you've got to help me," said Willie, "because I'm going to be a top cowhand." Robin arched her neck proudly. She whinnied as if to say, "I'll help you, Willie." Thoughts raced through Willie's head. Thoughts about everything except school. He slowed Robin down to a walk. He looked around for something to lasso. He wandered over by the river bank. He jumped down to look at some tracks left by a wild animal. In the distance, he heard a bell ringing. "Maybe we'd better hurry," said Willie, swinging into the saddle again. Off they galloped. When they reached the little log school, Willie saw a lot of ponies hitched outside. "Well, looky here," said Willie. "There's some mighty fine Indian ponies, Robin, but none so fine as you." But where were all the children? Willie quickly tied Robin and ran to the door. Almost every seat was filled. Miss McCoy was calling roll. "Booth McSpadden? Here." Willie looked around for a place. He sat down quickly. "Willie Rogers, you're late the very first day of school," said Miss McCoy. Willie gulped. What could he answer? How could he have wasted so much time? "We'll forget it this time," said Miss McCoy. She went on calling the roll. Willie recognized a few of the children, but there were lots of others he didn't know. There were several Cherokee boys and girls. Willie looked in surprise at 3 of the little Indian girls. Their dresses were ragged and torn. He thought of Sally and Maud and all the nice dresses they had. "Willie Rogers, please pay attention." Willie looked up sheepishly and grinned. The other children giggled. Miss McCoy was writing the alphabet on the blackboard. "Shucks, I know the alphabet," thought Willie. He looked out the window. The Indian boys had mighty nice horses, he thought. Then why didn't the little girls have better dresses? The saddle on one of the ponies caught Willie's eye. It was a homemade saddle and very unusual. On each side was a thick fur saddlebag, large and roomy. "Wish I had that saddle," he thought. "Willie Rogers, what is this?" asked Miss McCoy. She was pointing to a letter on the blackboard. But Willie was still looking out the window. "Willie Rogers?" Miss McCoy said sharply. Yes, Miss McCoy," said Willie. "Willie, you come stand in the corner until you learn to pay attention," said the teacher. "Those horses will be there when school's out." Willie started to speak, but he felt his face turning red. He got up slowly and shuffled over to the corner. He shouldn't have been looking out the window, he knew, but that was an interesting saddle. He'd just have to pay better attention. It isn't easy trying to amount to something, Willie thought. When lunchtime came, only a few of the children went home to eat. Most of them lived too far away. Willie went over to his little mare and got the lunch Sally had packed. The others got their lunches from their saddlebags and sat down. The Indian boys and girls gathered in a group, a little apart from the rest. Willie took out the thick sandwiches Sally had made and ate hungrily. As he was eating, he kept watching the Indian boys, especially a young one close to him. Then Willie stopped eating. The Indian children didn't seem to have much for lunch. The boy he was watching had only a bowl of some kind of mushy food Willie didn't recognize. It didn't look very good. Impulsively, Willie held up a sandwich. "Asillo," he said. "Would you like to have a sandwich? I've got more than I can eat." Willie was glad to see the boy smile when he heard the greeting in Cherokee. "Asillo," he answered. "I can speak English. I'll trade you some of my lunch for a sandwich." Willie stared at the peculiar-looking food the boy had. It looked awful. Now what was he to do? He had to be polite. I'm not very hungry, he said. He handed the boy the sandwich. My name is Willie. What's yours? John, here, you better have some of this. Willie took some of the food. It looked like cornmeal dampened with something, and it smelled sour. How was he ever going to eat it? He tried not to make a face. John laughed. Go on and try it, he said. It's good. Willie turned red. He was embarrassed about refusing the food, so he bravely took a big bite. He was surprised. It tasted good. He ate all his share quickly. Why, that's very good, he said. What's it called? That's coney henny, John said. We eat it all the time. I'll ask Sally to make me some, said Willie. The other boys started jabbering in Cherokee. Come on, said John, we're going to have a race. After much arguing, it was decided that Willie and 5 of the Indian boys about his size would race around the schoolhouse. A mark was drawn on the ground to mark the finish. The 6 boys lined up on the mark. Wish I were riding Robin, thought Willie. We'd show him. Just then one of the boys shouted, Go! And Willie set off as fast as he could. At first, all the boys were close together. Then Willie and John left the others behind. They ran around behind the school, going as hard as they could. As they came around in front again, Willie slowly got ahead of John. His heart was pounding and his head throbbing. He was running so hard. If I can only keep going, he thought. And he did. He came across the finish line just ahead of John. All the other children crowded around while the runners caught their breath. The older boys seemed friendlier now. They were talking and pointing to Willie. Willie didn't know enough Cherokee to understand. What are they saying, John? They're giving you a name, said John. They're going to call you Rabbit. Well, now I know I've got big ears, said Willie, but I didn't think they were that big. John laughed. No, it's because you can run so fast, he explained. Willie laughed too. It must have been that coney henny you gave me. At the end of the week, Mrs. Rogers came to visit Sally and find out how Willie had been getting along. She asked Willie, How do you like school by now, son? Well, Willie said, it's not bad at recess and lunchtime, but I'd rather be back on the ranch. Can I go home with you, Mama? Why, Willie, you've just started, said his mother. And when you once start a thing, you must finish it. Your sisters have gone to school and done very well. They all liked it. Well, said Willie, if you say so, I'll stay on at school, but I don't know if I'll like it. Sally laughed. Willie, you're just stubborn. I'll bet you wouldn't admit it if you did like it. Oh, yes, I would. But the trouble is, I'd rather be riding and roping. Poor little Robin stands outside school, waiting for me all day. Just then, Willie remembered something. Mama, he said, some of those little Indian girls have terrible dresses and shoes. They're all in rags. Don't you suppose Maud would have some extra clothes we could take over to them? Everybody in our family seems to have so many. What a nice idea, said Sally. But maybe Maud won't think so. Why, of course she would, said Mama. Now, let me see. She paused to think. Do you suppose it would be all right, Mama? Asked Willie. Only you wouldn't tell anyone it was my idea, would you? I'd feel kind of funny about that. You can do this yourself. You needn't tell the other children. I've got the best solution. I'll give you a bolt of cloth I just bought, and Miss McCoy can have the dresses made. That's a wonderful idea, said Sally. You know, Mama, Willie must take after you to think of such a kind thing. But where he gets all his mischief, I don't know. You might be surprised, Sally, said Mama. Her eyes were twinkling. Maybe he gets that from me, too. Willie rode along to school on Monday, planning what to do with the cloth. It was tied securely to his saddle, but he didn't want anyone to see it. He didn't want anyone to think he was showing off. When he got close to the schoolhouse, Willie saw that everyone else was inside. All the other horses were tied outside. He rode quickly to a clump of trees behind the school. Carefully he hid the cloth. Then he tied Robin with the other horses. He reached his seat just before the bell rang. When lunchtime came, he waited until all the children were outside eating. Then he slipped into the building with his package. He put it on Miss McCoy's desk. Maybe you could get some dresses made for the little Indian girls, he stammered. Well, for goodness sake, said Miss McCoy. Yes, I certainly can. The girls will be glad to get them. Yes'm, said Willie. He shifted from one foot to the other. He wanted to go outside. He could see the boys getting ready for a horse race. This is certainly a surprise, said Miss McCoy. I thought you didn't notice anything except horses. It's very thoughtful of you. Willie turned as red as a beet. I'm sure the girls will be glad to know one of their schoolmates was so kind, Miss McCoy went on. Willie was alarmed. You won't have to tell them who brought it, will you? I wouldn't feel right about that. All right, Willie. I'll keep your secret, said Miss McCoy, smiling. You run along now. Willie scampered out of the room. Thank goodness that was over. Wait for me, John, he shouted. Robin and I want to get in that race.